Hello everyone. The walls behind me keep getting higher. The key to laying aerated concrete blocks is setting the first row correctly, which I'll discuss today. Before laying the first row of blocks, I installed a waterproof barrier. It's needed to prevent capillary moisture rise. Here's a clear demonstration of what capillary moisture rise is. Here, a small puddle has formed and this block has absorbed water, which is now starting to move to the next one. All these blocks have been standing here for about 4 hours, and in about 4 hours the water has already moved to the second block. That's exactly why you need to install a cut-off waterproofing. If there was no water here, the blocks would be dry. And eventually, when everything is under the roof, it won't absorb moisture from anywhere, not from the foundation anymore. I bought torch-on waterproofing, but for these purposes roofing felt will do just fine. For a tighter fit of the waterproofing to the foundation, you can lay it on mortar. If you have roofing felt, for example, then definitely use mortar. Torch-on insulation, as the name suggests, can be torched on, but since I don't have a torch, I also laid it on mortar. After installing the cut-off waterproofing, you need to lay 4 corner blocks. Before laying the blocks, you need to determine which corner of your foundation is the highest and which is the lowest. In my case, the vertical deviation was 1.5 centimeters. Generally, a deviation of up to 2 centimeters is considered acceptable because with a greater deviation, the joint would be too large. Because the joint is large, we lay the first row on cement sand mortar. I used a ready-made M300 cement sand mix to prepare it. Since I don't have a concrete mixer either, I just mixed everything by hand with a shovel and a bucket. Before laying the corner blocks, to make sure they were flush with the surface, I set up strings and also used a laser level for more precise control, then applied the mortar. Using a regular trowel, I set the blocks in place, also checking them in all planes with a standard builder's level, and where I needed to align them, I tapped them with a mallet. The first row needs to be laid perfectly. The quality of the first row determines the entire subsequent masonry. The better the first row is laid, the easier and faster the rest of the work will go. Also, before laying, I did a complete layout of all the blocks, every block from all the walls. I made the layout in AUTOCAD so that I would immediately know which block to place and which side to face. When I set all 4 corner blocks, they needed to stand for a day so that the mortar would set, and when laying the partitions, the blocks wouldn't move anywhere. To accurately control the rest of the first row's position, laying the blocks is actually simple. We apply the mortar, set the block, determine its position using a string or a laser level, tap it where needed, and that's it. We move on to laying the next block. I filled the first row's vertical joints with standard mineral adhesive for aerated concrete blocks. If I did the masonry again, I'd use foam to fill the first row's vertical joints. I ended up with a 1.5 centimeter difference between the highest and lowest foundation corners. So, in the largest spots, the joint ended up being 2 centimeters because it was impossible to make it less than half a centimeter at the highest point, and because of that, at the lowest point, the joint ended up being 2 centimeters. That's a large joint, even though it's within the 3 centimeter tolerance. Larger joints are harder to lay, require more labor, and need more batches to mix. A concrete mixer makes the job easier, but doing it by hand is much harder and takes longer. You need to keep this in mind even when working on the foundation. The more level your foundation surface is, the easier it will be to do the masonry. here's what happens if you hit a D300 aerated concrete block with a mallet, and I was hitting it very gently. I tried to just let the mallet fall under its own weight, and I still ended up with these kinds of dents. It's a very porous aerated concrete block. Any impact makes it dent, crack or chip. The aerated concrete block has a size deviation of plus or minus 1 millimeter, so one block can be 1 millimeter bigger in one direction and another block can be 1 millimeter smaller in the other direction. And here we can see that it's perfectly even. I compared everything by the inner surface. I align all the walls by the inner surface accordingly. Here we can see a 2 millimeter step because this stone is minus 1 millimeter and this one is plus 1 millimeter, so we get a 2 millimeter step. Although here everything is perfectly even, everything is level. Since our foundation is a deformable base, meaning it can change its position in space, and also, for example, with temperature expansion, it can change its size to a small degree. At the same time, it isn't damaged, but aerated concrete blocks often break from minor impacts. Since our first row is connected to the foundation, the stress concentration in the first row of aerated concrete blocks didn't destroy it. That's why it's recommended to reinforce the first row, so I reinforced the entire first row of masonry. I got the idea from a channel to make a homemade wall chaser, which I used to cut a groove in an aerated concrete block. The groove itself is about 25 by 25 millimeters in size, with a distance from the edge of about 4 to 5 centimeters. Reinforcement should be done with 8 millimeter rebar. There's no point in using larger rebar because if the 8 millimeter rebar can't handle the stress, then the load it's meant for is already too much. That means your house was built incorrectly from the start and everything was done wrong, so there's no point in doing that. And it's also better not to use rebar smaller than 8 millimeters or to use 12 millimeter rebar for reinforcement. Only because I just had it left over, but I had nowhere else to use it. If it had just been lying outside, it would have rusted, and later on it still wouldn't have been usable anywhere. When I made 2 grooves around the perimeter of all the walls, they needed to be thoroughly dusted off. Then I laid out all the necessary rods, bending them at the corners, arranged the rebar to see if everything fit, if everything was okay, so I wouldn't have to unbend anything later. When it's filled with mortar, now I need to take everything out, remove it, fill it with mortar, and put it back in. If I understood everything correctly, the reinforcement of the corner of an aerated concrete wall should look like this. That is, we have one rod coming from the near side to the far side and one from the far side to the near side, and there's also this kind of reinforcement. I was laying bricks for the first time with no experience. The main task is control. I had double control over the position of the block in the plane, meaning there was a string, actually triple control, because there was a string stretched and a laser level was set up on the other side of the block. I also checked all the block surfaces with the spirit level. Still, there were some mistakes which I'll discuss next time. And if you subscribe to my channel block, I would just remove it, spread the mortar and set it again. It took me 7 days to lay the first row, not full working days, but in fact it was 7 days. Subscribe to my channel. I started raising my walls up, which I'll talk about next time. Subscribe so you don't miss the next video. If anyone has questions, feel free to leave them in the comments.